Alexandria and met with the former director of DARPA, and they talked about the Nimitz case. And he had mentioned during that workup of the Nimitz Carrier Battle Group, they were out there in support of a handheld ISR system that was still a dark program that was being protected, that the vast majority of people who were out there for that deployment workup were not aware of. And they actually was a sortie out to the USS Princeton, where DARPA scientists dressed in black did land, did go into the captain's stateroom, and did recover materials or in data that was part of the ISR system that was being tested, being used, being evaluated as part of the Nimitz workup. So the story of somebody going out and recovering data is true. I do not recall anything from the Hawkeye data. I know that there was data off the Princeton and the ISR system. I believe that was called the WASP, was the system, that DARPA did recover, and that was witnessed. Third Fleet staff was out there for that exercise, and they realized there was some unusual stuff going on. The fact that they had a halt training and they had a sortie aircraft to go out and investigate something they didn't understand that was showing up on the radar plot was off the Spy 1B radar off the Princeton as something unusual. They realized at the time there were some anomalies, and so the Third Fleet staff actually directed that data be recovered. Those data bricks with the radar plots was recovered, flown back to Third Fleet headquarters in San Diego, and then subsequently transported to Dahlgren, Virginia, where they had the labs do the exploitation. There were 2 physical searches that occurred, us trying to find that data, and the CNO staff trying to find that data. We couldn't find it. Another frustrating thing is when we would have stories from witnesses, we wanted to go back into the journals. At this time, I launched this Nav Bureau aircraft, all the facts of what happened operationally. When we looked for the journals and the flight, we could not find them in the archives. Very, very frustrated. Wow. Now, we did assess that the F-18s at altitude probably could not detect this DARPA ISR system that was being used in the workup at altitude because it cluttered down at the wave tops. However, the Princeton could probably detect that with their Spy 1B radar. But we don't know because we don't have the data. And there was a lot of time, a lot of effort, to scour the archives, to interview people, to try to have an understanding of what occurred, but we're never going to know. The public became aware of the incident because there was, imagery that was leaked to the public. A lot of the stuff that we evaluated was what the public had. It was out there on the web, but we didn't have the metadata and the raw data coming off the sensors to do a scientific examination to understand the phenomena. But the fact that we had that failure at that time led to the, I think contributed to Congress's concern, especially as we had, credible people that testified before Congress about the amazing things that they detected while performing their duties as Navy aviators. We believe they saw something. We can't, with any scientific, data, understand what was observed because the data was lost. It just does not exist. And the cases that Arrow did work, those are historical cases looking back. There were a lot of current UAP incidents at very sensitive places that really consumed the majority of Arrow's time, because part of Arrow's, mission is to prevent operational technological surprise. And there's a lot of things that Arrow contributed to, with serialized intelligence production. It had nothing to do with aliens, but they were reported to Arrow as a UAP incident. And as we were able to gather more data and information and work with the national labs, the IC analytic centers and the service centers, we were able to develop new understanding of adversary capabilities and the development of new systems that were operational. That was reported as part of serial intelligence, and we're never going to be able to share that with the public because we don't want to give up, sources and methods, and we do not want to inform our friends that we understand their capabilities. There's national security concerns. John Koloski, the current director, I believe it was in the winter, I think January of this year, when we were up on the Hill testifying both in the SCIF and then there was public testimony. He freely admitted to Congress and he disclosed, hey, there are cases we can't understand. There are critical people that reported the incident. We have data that confirms that there was something there. In some cases, we can measure the performance of whatever this object was. We had never done that before, but it's a small subset of the thousands of cases that Arrow works. And the U.S. government doesn't have a monopoly on the understanding of this phenomenon. I think there's been increasing comfort with Arrow and the government to work with experts outside, these special interest groups that have dedicated a lot of time to the understanding of the phenomena. And I think it would be foolish for the government not to leverage, that expertise and their analysis. And we're trying to do that. I know that we wanted to follow up in some of NASA's suggestions that we actually have some science challenges and we take non-sensitive data of a case that we haven't solved and offer it up to those who are willing, to commit their resources and time to help understand what it is. Yeah, there's something up there we don't understand, and the government admits that. And I want to know because as an intel professional and as a retired Marine, look, we can't afford an unidentified object to operate in the waters, the airspace, around our critical infrastructure operational forces. The world is too dangerous of a place as we look at the rise of these brilliant machines that can do awful things to our infrastructure and our people.
Right.
We need to understand that.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for clarifying that about the Nimitz, because I was a bit upset about that because I didn't think that AARO looked into it at all. So I do appreciate
Arrow
that.
did, but Arrow was frustrated. It was a comedy of errors. If you really wanted to build a case that there was some cabal of, people violating the laws and limited disclosure to Congress to hide the truth about what happened, everything that occurred and, contributed to that. There was, I don't want to call it incompetence or just a bureaucracy that didn't understand the significance of what occurred during that workup, that, pre-deployment workup. But the government didn't do a good job. We will admit that. Arrow exists today partially because of that. And if we had a similar incident to what occurred today, the outcome would have been different. So one of the things we really wanted to push to the workforce, the federal workforce, is you're not going to lose your job or security clearance or sent to the shrink because you saw something that you couldn't understand. You reported it as a UAP incident. That stigma we wanted to remove. Right. I think we've gone a long way to say it's your duty. It's part of your job to report those incidents. We look at it from a national security perspective, but we want to know. The government needs to understand. So I think we've had some breakthroughs there now, and there is some directives out there, in telling people how to report. There is a secure reporting mechanism where people can come to Arrow, report, their first person observations. We'll conceal your identity. We'll take your statement, and then we'll use that as the basis to initiate an investigation to understand. Arrow is on the cusp of having a public reporting mechanism. There's a real bias. If you look at the heat map or the UAP incidents, it kind of mirrors where DOD and the IC operates, because that's what we're protecting. What's the baseline at places that are not a vital, a security concern? What is the baseline? And that's some of the things that Arrow was doing, working with the combatant commanders, working with the Department of Energy to get some of our Gremlin sensor suites out into the field to do a long-term surveillance and collection of data, okay, to have a baseline and understand the pattern of life.
Will there be transparency with that?
Yes. One of the things that we try to do is make those collections at an unclassified level. Now, when you start aggregating different information feeds, the aggregation could sometimes reveal very sensitive information. So we will protect that at a higher classification level. But the aerial sensors themselves, what we're doing with our active radar and our hyperspectral sensors, that was unclassified. Now, did we leverage classified government means to supplement and augment that collection? Absolutely. We did that.